Most people who watch this channel probably know by now that I was an officer in the army for 8 years. But before that, I was something else. I was a student, and I was a student at the University of Cambridge, if you can believe that. I won a scholarship there, I graduated from there, had a great time. I'm not some posho, by the way, however that might sound. I just worked really hard and it paid off. This weekend though, I was reading an article in the Telegraph. Yes, the Telegraph. And it really sort of disappointed and saddened me and surprised me all in equal measure. And the headline of the article is basically this: Oxford and Cambridge are to move away from traditional exams because there's too big of a grade gap between ethnicities. Now, what it's really saying when you go into the article, which we'll do in a lot more detail, is that people from ethnic minority backgrounds are not getting as good grades. We're going to talk about that. I'm probably going to say a few things which are pretty controversial. Some people might not like it. You are welcome to leave your comments in the comment section below, and I will read them, and I'll try and engage with as many of them as I can. Look, I think the reality is this, and I have some stats and some data that I think pretty much prove this. These universities, sadly, have now been giving an easier ride to ethnic minorities to gain access into those institutions. And so it should not really be that surprising that their overall grade results are lower. I do have some evidence to back that up. We'll get into that later in the video. I wonder how many dislikes I've earned already. Okay, first let me just tell you a story about what exams were like for me at Cambridge. And across different subjects, this will vary. Of course, if you did physics or something, it'll be totally different. But for me, you had 5 papers and they were 5 exams and they were 3 hours each. Now 4 of those were fairly straightforward. You had 3 questions and 3 hours to do them, so roughly an hour per question. Kind of normal stuff, similar to A-levels, just a little bit longer and a lot harder, obviously. The last paper, and I'm going to try and explain this to you in a way that will convince you that this is really hard, but for some of you, you'll still think this is really easy. You have 3 hours to write one answer. So obviously you need to write sort of approximately 3 times the amount of the as each answer you would give on the other papers. And there's just one question, except there isn't actually a question at all. Instead, what you get are a series of about 25 different words. You have to pick one of those words and then write a title, a question for yourself, and then answer it over the course of 3 hours. Now, for some people, I know you'll be thinking the prospect of writing your own exam question and then answering it must be way easier. I promise you it's not. There are so many traps you can fall into. Firstly, if you don't really fully understand what any of these words in your chosen subject, whatever degree you're reading, actually mean, you're in a really bad spot. You're probably going to fail this paper. Secondly, if you write a question that the examiner feels is, I guess, kind of boring or uninteresting or not really related to the word, you've just kind of shooed it in, you're probably going to fail the paper. And if you fail the paper, you fail the year. I know some of you will not be convinced even by that this is really hard, but trust me, it is. It's the nightmare paper that everyone dreads. Believe me or not. Now, to me, this style of examination is kind of like an academic gauntlet, an intellectual challenge. It's hard, it's really hard, it's meant to be hard. And if you come through the other side having done well, you've truly achieved something. Now, it's not perfect. A lot of people suffered with their mental health during exam term, and some people even went as far as to take their own lives during exam term. One of those stories is actually quite close to me, but I'm not going to go into it. So what have they done to change these exams? Well, basically they're making them easier. They've turned them into open book examinations. So instead of having to learn the information, you can just sort of learn where in the textbook that information might be. I think this is crazy. Listen, I'll tell you why, according to the Telegraph article, they're doing this. According to the University of Cambridge's plan, academic practices may be to blame for awarding gaps, i.e. grade differences, and it hopes to improve outcomes for Black British and British Bangladeshi students. Okay, and to be clear, it comes as universities face pressure to close the gap between the number of first and 2-1 degrees given to white middle-class students compared with other groups. Okay, so there's some kind of disparity between I guess white kids and ethnic minorities at university. Indulge me one little moment to sidetrack here. There seems to be this very weird, pervasive thing in society where if any ethnic minority is doing worse than white people, then there's a problem. The system has failed. Something needs to be changed. We need to do something. Okay? But if any ethnic minority is doing better than white people, then that's something to be celebrated. Everything's going swimmingly. It's never the other way around. Like, well, look at all these white kids who are in council houses who are really, really struggling. Maybe we need to bring them up because the Chinese and the Indian families in the UK are doing much better. If you don't believe me that this is true, right, look at the statistics for the average salaries in America. Indian and Chinese families, or people from Indian and Chinese families, earn more than white Americans. White Americans earn more than black Americans. And yet, whenever people look at this data and they say that, you know, this is societally unfair to black people, which maybe it is, they will always compare the amount that black people earn to white people, never to Chinese people who are the top earners. You know, earn like 30% more on average than white Americans. It's just ridiculous, right? That's a little sidetrack, a little tangent. Let's not go too deep into that rabbit hole. Now, when you're at one of these two universities, as I was, so I speak from experience, you all have, whether you're black British, Bangladeshi, white British, whatever, you all have exactly the same opportunities educationally. I'm completely serious, and nothing in your home or personal life really makes that much of a difference. Certainly not the kind of difference that changing the exam structure would help with. Look, when I was at Cambridge, you weren't allowed to get a job, okay? As crazy as that might sound to some people, I think there was some restriction where you could get a job that you worked for 6 hours a week maximum, right? But basically you were banned from getting a job alongside your studies. And to ensure from the university that you didn't need a job to make it through and to have enough money to survive, well, they gave you a bursary. And the Cambridge bursary was at the time £3,500, I think, every year that we were given. Fantastic, and that's only possible because there are some very generous, wealthy donors to those universities. It's amazing, and a big thank you to them. It paid for a very large beanbag that I had, and I've got no idea where it's gone. But yeah, big shout out to the bursary donors. Look, the reason I mention all of this is not just to tell you stories about when I was a grotty little student at Cambridge, is to show you that if all of these students were academically equivalent, broadly, right? Not all students are going to be equal that get accepted. Some will just be utter geniuses, right? That's the nature of these two universities. But broadly, if all of the students from these different ethnic groups were academically equivalent, they all got the same results, no one got an easier ride into the university, well, they all have exactly the same opportunities, the same supervision time, the same lectures, the same everything. Nobody needs to work, nothing like that. There is no reason that they should get any worse results. I'll come back to this. Now, the second thing I find really strange about all of this is this idea that if you make the exams easier, open book assessments, whatever, that this is going to reduce the attainment gap. And a lot of people will naturally be thinking, that's just going to make it easier for everyone. So the white kids are going to find it easier and the black British kids are going to find it easier. So the attainment gap is pretty much going to stay exactly the same, right? But not quite. Think about it. If you make a task easier, more people can do it, and they can probably do it competently. If the task in question was, I don't know, learning how to sit, then pretty much everyone could get a first-class degree in that. Look, if you don't believe me, Annie, sit, sit. First-class degree student right there. Obviously, that's a very crude example. Studying at Cambridge is never going to be as easy as Annie sitting down in the field. But my point is this: if you make the exams easier, the attainment gap will close because everyone can do it. But then what's the point? What's the point in even examining students anymore? If you're just going to keep making the exams easier, it's pointless. Okay, let's stop beating around the bush, because what do I actually think has happened here? I think it's quite straightforward. I think they've made it easier for people from ethnic minority backgrounds to get into Oxford and Cambridge. And they probably thought that this was some noble, virtuous thing to do, that they were correcting some social society injustice or whatever, blah, blah, blah. They assumed that once these kids got into the university, they would have all the same access to all the best lecturers in the country, the best supervisions, tutorials, blah, 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 whatever, and it would all work itself out. But it hasn't worked itself out, because what you've done is deliberately letting people who are not quite as bright as the students who perhaps otherwise would have been there. The problem they now have is, well, how do we fix this problem? And so they've come up with the idea of changing the entire exam structure. It's like trying to correct a mistake with another mistake. It's absolutely insane. Now, I promised earlier that I had some data that might convince you that it has been made easier for minority ethnic groups to get access into Oxford and Cambridge, to be admitted, to be offered a place. And in 2018, I found this article in the BBC, which was basically bemoaning these two universities for being majority white. Even though the country is majority white, I digress. And in 2018, 80% of students at Cambridge were white British. Okay, fine, fair enough. Fast forward 2022 to 2023, a DEI report from Cambridge University. Now, or last year, 2 years ago maybe, 37% of undergraduates are from a BAME, Black, Asian or Minority Ethnic background. So in 2018, it was about 20% BAME, and fast forward 5 or 6 years, and it's 37% BAME. It's basically doubled. For postgraduates, it's even higher. It's like 45%. What has caused, if we're honest, right, minority ethnic admittances to Cambridge to double in the space of 5 years? Now look, some of this change could be explained through a whole host of different things. It could be explained through perhaps Cambridge and Oxford now have better community outreach programs into areas where there are mostly minority ethnic students at school. Sure, but do I believe that that kind of thing would explain a literal doubling of undergraduates at Cambridge in the space of 5 years with a BAME background? No, I do not. Let's take a scientific approach, right? Because we're talking about academics. I'll give you a hypothesis, and then we'll consider what kind of evidence would support that hypothesis. So in this case, our hypothesis is this. Minority ethnic groups have been given an easier ride into these universities. What kind of evidence might we expect to see to support that hypothesis? Well, for one, that they have worse outcomes at the end of their degrees than other students who weren't given an easier ride into the university. But that's exactly what we're talking about. That's exactly what we're seeing, right? There's probably some circular reasoning in there. Someone can pick me up on it. I don't really care. Look, I'm not saying that these kids are stupid or anything like that. You know, these kids will still be bright, okay? These kids with a BAME background, they'll still have like A star, AA at A level, right? They're still going to be intelligent kids. But are we accepting them instead of, say, a white kid from a state school who got 3 A stars? I don't know. I don't have the data. I can't give you a real factual answer. This is just my pure speculation based on what I'm looking at. I find it really sad because, at least in recent history, not in long history, but in recent history, these two universities have given so much to the country and to the world, and they've been based on meritocracy, not 500 years ago, okay? But in recent history, they've been based on meritocracy. And that tradition of meritocracy seems to have been unraveled by DEI and the sort of woke culture. It's why it makes me so happy to look at America and see all of these DEI woke programs just getting obliterated. As I mentioned earlier, the people who run these DEI programs and initiatives, I've got no doubt that they think that they're doing some kind of moral good, that they are virtuous, they're doing the right thing, correcting social injustices, blah, blah, blah. But they're wrong for so many reasons. Look, if I was a black guy in this country, by now I'd be pretty annoyed by people constantly telling me that I'm inferior in some way, that I need help to achieve anything in my life, blah, blah, blah. I'd be so sick of all of that crap by now. It's kind of offensive, these sorts of programs, to people from minority groups, because there's a lot of people who are just bright enough to get in to achieve those things all by themselves, right? The second thing is, I really worry about this. I've spoken about it already, but I think these kinds of programs, right, DEI programs, are basically just racist against white people. I'm sorry, but I really do. And I know this is going to be controversial and some people are going to kick off, but if what you're trying to do is have these diversity quotas, and even in the 2023 DEI report from Cambridge, it talks about them exceeding quotas and stuff like that. Brilliant. Why do you have these quotas? It makes no sense, right? You're meant to be meritocracy. People are either good enough or they're not. If in 1 year, no white person at all was good enough to get in Cambridge, obviously that would be kind of a bit unusual in a majority white country, but so be it. As long as you are following your meritocratic principles, then fine, whatever, right? That'll be the case in like 30 years' time anyway. There's not going to be many of us left. I digress slightly. Look, I think these programs are inherently racist against white people because they're always targeted against white people, right? It's just the reality. I'm just saying it how I truly feel about it. Now, the third reason that I think this is wrong, now whether this is a moral consideration or not, I don't know, but it makes the institutions just look a bit ridiculous, right? And you start to lose credibility when you introduce like these crazy DEI policies and you have to lower the examination threshold and things like that. I know this because the same thing happened in the army. When I joined the army, we had separate tests. Well, it was the same test, but we had separate standards for men and women. And then people who were older also had lower standards. So if you were a 40-year-old woman, you weren't expected to pass the same test that a 21-year-old man straight out of parachute training would be expected to do, right? Bad example, but whatever. The standards for the tests were different based on gender and age. Okay, whether you agree with that or not, I'm not sure I do, but there you go. What did they do? Well, they made a gender neutral test. Now, how do you think they achieved this? Do you think they just demanded all of a sudden that women just need to get fitter and stronger? No, they just lowered what's actually required. You used to have to run 1.5 miles in 10.5 minutes, right? Reasonably quick, you'll definitely be blowing, you'll be out of breath because you'll be giving it everything you've got, but most people could do that in about 9.5 minutes. What did they lower it to? 2 kilometers, so a lower distance in 13 minutes. So you've got an extra 2.5 minutes. And that way, basically, everyone can pass the new fitness test. Doesn't matter what age you are, what gender you are. So what incentives are there now for that 21-year-old lad to stay fit enough to pass, a 1.5 mile run in 10.5 minutes? None. He can actually afford to get way less fit and still pass the test. Now, what this has actually resulted in is certain regiments in the army imposing their own standards, certain commanding officers saying, no, that's way too slow. You can basically jog 2 kilometers in 13 minutes. It's really not hard. So a lot of commanding officers have introduced their own standards, which are a lot higher because the standards are just so ridiculous. Anyway, I make of that all what you will. It's just this kind of like weird stuff that we've got that no longer focuses on being excellent, but just inclusive. Like everyone has to get involved, right? Doesn't matter about being excellent anymore. That culture of excellence is gone. Anyway, look, very, very sad. I'm kind of rambling a little bit now. I've been talking for 4.5 minutes straight, which is probably a good sign that I need to end the video, or it's going to be way too long. A little bit less scripted and structured than my other videos. Not that any of them are doing super well. I used to routinely get videos that would get like 20 or 30,000 views. Ever since I had that video that got 280,000 views, my videos have really struggled since then. I thought my last video about Trump was excellent. It has a much bigger watch time, so people who click on it watch most of the video, which is amazing. More people than usual were clicking on the video. Basically, it has every recipe for the YouTube algorithm to give it a push, but they didn't. So it is what it is. It's just a little bit demoralizing. Anyway, right, 5 minutes of pure rambling. I'm literally running out of field, and I've got to go back and get this one home. So yeah, till the next one. Peace. Because I'm not wearing that stupid jacket, the weather's taking a real turn for the worse. I'm going to lose my cap. Oh well, I deserve it.